Dave, thank you so much for joining the podcast episode. It's an exciting time because Core to Cloud and SenseOn have recently partnered. So for everyone listening, Dave, you created the business. You're a founder. Can we go back though, and how did you even get to building a business? So did you do anything technical at school? Were you passionate about computers? What drove you to starting a business and in vendor world, I guess?
Yeah, well, we were just talking about getting old before, right? And and so I was born in 81. You know, so it was right at the cusp of, what they sort of call digital natives. So I sort of snuck in there. I think moreover, I was quite lucky. I was my dad's excuse to sort of get a computer, so Spectrum, and then Amiga came along. And so I was the beneficiary, if you like, for his intrigue in computers as well. And so I've always had a computer since a very early age. In fact, I remember my mum, bless her, teaching me how to touch type on this little VTech thing. When the letters come up, you then got scored how quickly you did. And so what's the relevance of that? Well, actually, I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, really at the height of the Troubles in the 80s. I, based really on what I saw, I grew a huge passion for wanting to join the military, based on the sort of violence that was going on. And I think as a young teenage boy growing up on a diet of, US-centric, action movie, hero movies, Saturday Taken Up with the A-Team and Airwolf and those sort of types of series. It really developed a passion to go into the military. And I wanted to go in when I was 16, but my mum wouldn't sign the paperwork, which was probably a smart decision. But as soon as I was 18, I joined the Royal Marines.
Okay.
And then a few years after that, I went into our special forces, and through several twists of fate, I joined a team there where there was a very visionary leader at the time, and he was like, Dave, I want you to begin looking at this computer network operations at the time. Cyber wasn't really widely used, and be it serendipity or by design, it was probably a blend of both. Because I had this background since being a kid, I just got it, and all of a sudden it awoken an equal level of passion in terms of technology, hacking, and how you exploit that. And so I began developing capabilities, doing operations, and then I was asked to actually run the very first time that we'd ever done any of that type of training in special forces. So I went very
at
much
the forefront.
Yeah. So I very much went, from having this constant in my childhood of having computers all the time to then being able to use it in a very important real world scenario. So I didn't go to university to do a computer science degree, but actually one thing I benefited from learning technology and how to exploit it and the consequences of the widespread adoption of technology, it was done with a huge amount of focus because, we were looking for hostages abroad. We were looking at how to, and so therefore there was a very compelling, reason why to learn and understand and apply.
Which can be missed at university. Even I did marketing.
I wouldn't know.
Well, no, I did my marketing degree. And don't get me wrong, I wouldn't turn the time back of doing university. But you don't really learn until you're on the job. I don't. No, we never did ROI.
Yeah.
It was create an exhibition and you'd spend all the money and do all the design and you'd put the project in. And I don't remember, I'm sorry to any of my lecturers if it is, but I don't remember them ever going, what's the return on the investment on the business?
Yeah.
What are you getting out of that? How's that driving pipeline? It was always the creative.
Yeah.
So I think, you're not ever using your resource, your actual practical skills until you leave university, where you just got rocket shipped straight into practical, into important, hostage is a very important situation where you wouldn't practice that behind
because
the
you care,
desk.
Right? No one joins the military who doesn't care and feel passionate about this bigger sense of mission and wanting to do stuff. And people would come in the morning and I'm keyboard imprinted on my desk because I'd fallen asleep at my desk, and I was very grateful to work with equally as passionate and as determined and as hardworking people in that environment. And so that was like, very normal across the board. And so I got immersed in it, and I was I feel so grateful in terms of the investment and the time and the people that I got to work with. So, all of a sudden, I guess, they had a geek who didn't mind to be shot at. So I was like prostituted, quite frankly, if I can say that, to like, different, like, government departments and working with like a wider diverse of people and learning from like, the sort of different mission sets that were going on, which gave me like quite a good 360-degree view of the pros and cons of different approaches. And so like, for, like almost 10 years of that bit of my career, I was like immersed in it. And then ironically I got promoted, which is this sounds great normally, but what that means in the military, we don't quite have the same, or certainly didn't at the time, same flexibility with managing people's careers down specific tracks. So like I became what's known as an officer. I guess I got like sort of more of a managerial role, which meant, hey, you got to go and do these more broader range of jobs, and that's where the conflict of the two passions came in. And I was like, I just had a sense at the time, that, I felt like I was hanging on to this sort of like speeding locomotive that was only going to get faster and faster, and I felt like if I let go now and go and do, the standard officer career path in the military, I guess, you're never going to catch us back on, because this like snowball is rolling down this hill, is only getting bigger and faster, and I really passionately believe that this was gonna, it's gonna transform the world, how we live, and obviously that's come to pass. Definitely, I think we'd all agree. And so I left, and very challenging time in my life, right? Like ever since I was like a 13-year-old boy, this is all I wanted to do. And so I went through a couple of really hard years, I think, and
because I don't think people talk about the military is because it's more, isn't it, than just the job. There's like the culture and the people, and because my uncle, he went in and out a few times, and he really struggled to come out to normal, because there's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot of collaboration and team morale. I guess it's
and it's
everything.
a sense of mission. Like, you know what I mean? That's one of the things that leaves a bit of a hole that you can probably neither describe at the time or even recognize in yourself at the time that you're going through a bit of a challenging period. But of course your mates do, right? You know what I mean? And so then, of course they rally around and help and support and sort of get you back up on your feet again. And so during that time, I began teaching, cyber operations, law enforcement. I began doing incident response. So I was able to then, continue on with what I was, extremely passionate about. And now I begin to learn about the commercial world, So, I was very naive, I remember, going into a meeting. In fact, it was my old boss in the military who had subsequently left and had taken a position in a large oil and gas firm. He's like, hey, Dave, could you come up and speak to my head of IT about cybersecurity, And I remember that very first meeting, and he was I sort of put my suit on. I'd got on the train, come up to London. I was like, ooh, I was like, this is cool. And the very first question he asked me was, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I was like, oh my God, he actually still takes a piss out of me to this day about this meeting. It was like my tie was tightening up around my throat, and I was like, because it was actually, I don't know what to say, you know what I mean? And it was and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be harder than I think it's going to be. And I went from that meeting to have a coffee with a friend, Nick, who had recently left government. I had worked with him in there and had founded Darktrace at the time,
Oh, okay.
And he was like, Dave, you do not have a clue about the commercial world. I was like, yeah. I was like, why don't you come in here with me and I'm setting up the sales and the go-to-market team here. We can sort of work on this together. And so, whilst doing all of the incident response and the teaching, I went in with Nick very early on in Darktrace, and I'm very grateful actually for that experience, because there's not many places, or certainly there wasn't at the time, and I sort of fell into it just by association with
person.
and he took a bet, right? I mean, like, if you were setting up a SEALs team, you would not. The one person you would not have hired at that point would have been me. But very, very grateful for the experience, because certainly at that time there just was not or very few fast-growing UK startups, and they grew, and had a great marketing, like very experienced investors who had done this before, and so that was like. The one thing that you get good at in the military is learning, because they're always sending you on courses. So you actually, if there's one muscle that you develop, it's the ability to learn fast and then apply it quickly, to like a high degree of effectiveness. And so, I was just like very, very lucky to learn from very experienced people, and I think that early stage go-to-market development of any technology company is unique in the sense that you can't just apply a playbook you've used before or someone else's playbook. You've got to figure it out, and that builds a sort of capability in the people who can go through that I think is a rare skill set today in technology, and definitely passionately the UK can sort of like develop that more and more and more and get that flywheel going. I think that's you can see the difference between that was like 2015 and now already in the UK startup ecosystem. But yeah, so I had that experience there, which I was very grateful with. But I'd always been nurturing some of like the concepts and capabilities I've been working on in government, and what then became apparent from the teaching of how you look at like a network from an offensive problem, and then also doing the incident response and helping everything from sovereign wealth funds out when they got hacked to like individuals, etc. I began to connect the two, and then the idea for SenseOn then begins to form, and somewhat like counterintuitively to what was going on in the industry, I had a sense of perspective, and I think this is going to be a long-term, high-risk strategy, but I think this is something that we really, to build, So this is going to be a big bet, because we're going to take a first principles approach to really trying to solve some of these big trends that we see emerging in the industry today. And there was really 4 that stood out for me. The first one was, hey, things are getting really complex, not just complicated, but complex, which is a whole different level, and you can really track this from the advent of the public cloud companies in the sort of mid 2000s, and around that time, we still had this idea, we're sat in Quarter Cloud's amazing castle, right? And so we had an idea at that time of this perimeter security model, this like castle and moat, put everything in the middle, you're fine, that was already breaking down. And actually a far more suitable mental model for today is, actually what you have is a sort of archipelago of data islands, each with its own attack surface and its own unique problems and data sets that you've got to almost apply an architecture to. And so that, was going to be incredibly challenging. The second key trend I thought that was going to be incredibly challenging was the advancement of the threat. And, having seen in government like the likes of the Snowden leaks and, where I think during that period, people's sort of field of vision went from this is what's in the art of the possible to oh wow, this is what's in the art of the possible, and you can take like a like a cyberpunk type view of it, saying all information like wants to be free, and but the point of the point that I took away from all of that was, be that by advanced threats being discovered, reverse engineered, and better understood, you were going to get this like advanced capability that would gradually trickle down to less advanced actors who could then take advantage of the research, the development, the innovation, and the money that had gone in to develop that, be it tradecraft or technical exploitations. So that was the second thing, the advancement of the threat. Like because when I learned hacking, you would go and you would buy hardware, then you would install a range of operating system, and then you install some vulnerable applications. So it was not an insignificant task to go and teach yourself how to hack, and you'd hang out in some pretty dodgy forums, quite frankly,
And the hoodie thing was a thing.
Yeah, it was a thing. Yeah. And so now you open up a tab in a browser and you've got a professional training dojo that you can do, and so the accessibility of the learning is so much easier. And why does that matter? Well, it matters as if you are in an economic situation whereby you need to put food on the table in your family and you've got the technical nous to be able to do so. Well, there's a very low barrier to entry to learn how to hack, and then you're up and running, and you've got at least.
And there's also, we were talking about this yesterday, if you can get hold of credentials in the dark web, there's now managed services that will just take 10% of it and go do the hack for you, and it's like, what? Like that. It's just madness, really.
Yeah. And so you can't think of the advancement of the threat exactly just in terms of technical development. You got to think about it like organizational development.
They've got HR departments.
Exactly. In fact, if you were an investor and a business came along to you and said, "I'm making like 100 million a quarter," you'd probably want to invest in a business.
Exactly.
So there's two things that falls out from that. So they're going to improve the organizational design to be more efficient and effective. But also, as you would do if you were like a technology company, you would reinvest some of that money in research and development. And that's exactly what we're seeing now, And so the advancement of the threat, again, is something that we're not going to be able to control. And then something that we're very passionate about at SenseOn is data, the explosion of data. And if you look at the data curve from even 2010 to where we are now, it's exponential. And so estimated to be around about 185 zettabytes of data being produced, adopted and consumed in the world by 2025. Now, interestingly, 50% of that's going to be in the cloud. So, Dave, what does that mean? Well, let me paint a mental picture.
Yeah.
So if 1 byte of data, 8 bits, was a single grain of rice, you could fill the whole Pacific Ocean with rice with just 1 zettabyte. So just think of that in terms of like a mental model. So what the implication is, of course, if I'm an attacker and I'm after your data, well, there's just so much more of it around, first and foremost, right? But if I'm after specific data, there's a hell of a lot more for me to hide in, right? To get it out in a covert manner. And so that data problem is challenging, and it's an opportunity for the attackers, but it's a huge challenge from when we begin to think about how do we design our security architectures of the future,
Having, just thinking of the rice, having visibility of it.
Yeah.
If your job is to secure that.
Yeah.
And that amount of data is being produced or being put in the cloud, and even we talk about cloud, but cloud is still quite new for some. Some people are still moving, are still doing the architect of that. So for you, how does someone even begin to have visibility or know they've got visibility? Or are there some rooms right now that the light might need switching on that they don't even know it needs switching on? What are you, with SenseOn, what were you trying to... So you saw the 3 trends. You knew what was on the market. I mean, you were with Darktrace, so you could see what was going on. So what were you like, this is what they're missing. And this is what we're going to have to do.
Yeah, well, so it all starts with the data, and it starts with how we think about traditional architecture designs, which at the time, and this was more... how the cybersecurity industry had evolved was because, there's a saying, security is hard for a reason. And so from a technology provider point of view, to begin to solve the problem, the best way to tackle it was to break it down into little components and little chunks, one piece at a time, Let's try and build a decent antivirus so that, people can't use commodity malware against endpoint. Let's try and monitor our networks. And, there's an evolution of a range of great open source projects and, like network security products that came on the market. And then, of course, mobile device products and cloud, and hence the proliferation begins to become a bit of a problem. And so what that means is when you've got lots of things trying to do little bits and pieces of the puzzle, it causes a number of different problems for people trying to defend themselves. And like I said, I want to reiterate the point. This was out of necessity, you know what I mean? Like, we didn't do this as an industry on purpose. It's because we're trying to solve a really, you know, cybersecurity, what I love about it is it's adversarial, you know what I mean? So it's not like you can just build something and it's a static thing and you've solved that technology problem. You've got to constantly iterate on it. So that's why you got to break it down into these small component parts. But like, that causes technical challenges from like a security engineer. So if you're going to engineer an efficient and effective system to protect your enterprise, in an ideal world, that's not the approach that you would take, you know? And so, you know, what those sort of early sort of like technology companies, like, you know, your EDR and your NDR, they could exploit, though, was the power of the cloud to allow them to give more computing power. So when I set up SenseOn, I was like, well, hey, we're going to make a big bet here. You know, we're going to like try and tackle these emerging trends. And what we're going to try to do is, you know, we're going to forget about everything we know about cybersecurity. And we're going to think, hey, if we were to design something from scratch that, you know, could begin to solve this little bits and pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, if it could allow us to, like, you know, write analytics easier, because of course when you've got little bits and pieces of everything, they've all got their own bespoke analytics, they've all got their own language, their own data model, their own, you know, and the problem was best summed up to me at a time when I was doing my sort of research by the head of a SOC of a very, very large, probably one of the largest insurers in the world. And he sat me down and he said, Dave, it's like this. It's like doing the world's most difficult jigsaw puzzle, but there's no picture in the box and there's loads of pieces missing, you know. I was like, okay. So then it begs the question, what do you begin to do? And you've got to start with the data, you know. And so really, SenseOn is known for really two key technical innovations, Kelly. The first one is what we call the universal sensor. And this is what allows us to get, in the words of one of our customers, a global manufacturing company, beautiful data, you know, and what it allows us to do is we combine identity information, endpoint information, and full deep packet inspection information on the endpoint that it deploys to itself. So it's a bit of software, deploys to containers, infrastructure in the cloud, Windows, MacBooks, Linux machines, servers, it doesn't really matter, very lightweight. And what it does then, it creates this sort of defense and intelligence mesh network. And so with sort of normal sort of monitoring, I guess, you're getting the bit of the iceberg that's above the surface of the water, you know, and of course the vast majority of the density is below, you know, and so you're then getting this at a very low level, and so you're seeing, and you've got access all of a sudden to the whole iceberg, you know. So that's the first advantage, very much more complete data, you know. The second advantage is that it's already unified for you, you know. So like traditional architectures, they try to collect data from all of the different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in the back end, normally in what's known as a SIEM, a security information management platform. And then the manual work begins in terms of trying to connect what this one product calls an IP address to what this other one calls an IP address, and then normalize and etc. from that point. And it's timely. It's challenging because you're at the whim of, if this product over here like just changes its data model slightly, then it has a downstream effect, you know. And then, of course, you've got to write analytics over this data, you know. So that's the next. So now you've gone to the infrastructure team. They've got you all of the logs to cover up the blind spots between your single point tools, and then you're like, okay, now let's begin the challenge of writing analytics over the data. And there's always a tension when it comes to writing analytics because, and it's a tension versus speed versus quality, you know. So do you get like lots of coverage very quickly? But if you do, the chances are they're not going to be very high quality alerts. And what that means then, your security operations team are not going to be happy with you.
And it's just notification fatigue, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly,
Anything decent.
Yeah. And that, you know, going back to the time when I was doing incident response, was like something that I really identified as a root cause problem, because inevitably I'd go in to help out these businesses, but the alerts would already be in the SIEM, you know. But the fact was, it was the 50th, 100th, 1000th time a day they'd seen those alerts. And, you know, we've got amazing talent, amazing people in the industry, but it doesn't matter how diligent you are, like, you know, you will get fatigued, just like, you know, it's the same thing, repetitive. And of course, you're just seeing one piece of puzzle without any context, you know. And we'll talk about that, I think, like, well, let's come back around to like the context and the alert fatigue and the problem, but that's a real pain in the industry, you know, is in this like constant bombardment of alerts, because immediately, you know, you may have spent tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds on a technology, but within, you know, the drop-off curve of trust in that technology is steep if it is not tuned, operating correctly, you know. And so then how do you begin to solve that problem? So the first problem was, let's sort out the data. You know, when I came to find SenseOn, I think like that's going to make it, you know, if you really believe in taking a first principles approach, you got to start with the data. And then the second thing is, how do you move from security teams being reactive to every notification? And I see this, you know, I go onto a call with a security team and they're looking at the screen constantly as things come in, and they can't focus, you know. So how do you?
It's like emails, though, isn't it?
It's like emails, exactly.
Too many emails.
Yeah.
Too many emails. Like, I mean, I don't know how you guys operate, but we have multiple different platforms we communicate on. Yeah. It's like, what do I tackle first? Emails, Teams. We have a chat. We have, you know, also like people putting things on your desk. Like, what's the priority? Is it the emails? Is it the
and that is
even the exclamation mark thing, by the way, guys, doesn't work on me anymore because everyone does that. So all I have is exclamation mark emails with all the other emails. So I can't even imagine from a scene perspective. I get bombarded
and
with
the
emails.
numbers get a bit mental here, right? You know, I've gone into some SOCs where they're like 25 million alerts a month, you know, and like, you know, I said we're a very data-driven organization, and you sort of say, okay, well, there was a bit of research back actually 2019 where this sort of said, quite unhelpfully, that the average time to investigate a single alert ranges from between 10 minutes to 50 minutes. But if you even took the minimum amount, you know, that would be, and you then took the time that analysts work, that would be like a $1.6 billion annual salary bill for analysts to get through all of those alerts if they worked, you know, if they never took a break, never got ill, etc. And so it becomes almost quite comical at the very large scale.
It's just like, it's not a thing.
But like, it's almost, this is the point, right? At the very large scale, it's the most important. So like Fortune 250 companies have on average a 50% chance of having a data breach that will cause a material impact every single year. And then interestingly, there's another 33% chance on top of that it will happen more than once. So it's almost these bigger enterprises need to help the most, but actually, because of this, like I say, no one's fault. It's how the industry had to evolve. It's an impossible problem. Yeah. And so very early on, in fact, the very first thing that we sort of invented was this concept of AI triangulation. And essentially what that does, as opposed to like telling you about every single thing that comes across your estate, what it does, it just begins to build up a potential attack path, you know? So it basically continually assesses risk and trust for every identity endpoint, every network interaction, and it's building this attack path for you on your behalf underneath the hood. Now you can go and you can look at all the attack paths as they build up, but what it means is it has a much wider field of view data from the universal sensor in which to like hold the alerts from your environment against, a background to hold them against, so it knows what happened before, what happened after, you know. So it's sort of doing that analysis on your behalf. And, you know, the net result of it is, you know, we've got like FTSE 100 companies who are getting 30 alerts a month, you know, going from like tens of thousands to like
so they
30.
can check all the stuff if they want to.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that you're kind of like traffic lighting them. So you're like going, right, well, this is actually not that bad. It's like an orange, green. This is like an amber. And then, this is a red. And you need to know about that one. Yeah,
because what you very quickly realize is...
it's like having an EA for your emails.
It's like having an EA for your emails. Well, we actually say, hey, we enable you to get inbox zero for cybersecurity. You know, like just as something to connect on that particular pain point. But the...
Sorry, I distracted you.
Yeah, I was going to say something, and I bet you it was really profound, but I completely forgot.
I said about the traffic light system, and then notifications and pinging. Yeah. And then you get the ones that you actually need.
Well, I mean, like that's exactly what we do, right? You know, but it stops you from being like, you know, reactive to moving to be like a much more proactive sort of view. And And the reason why it's open and transparent for you to look at is because of this concept of trusting the machine, because it's a bit of a weird situation. Because
because I imagine if you've been getting hundreds and hundreds of them a day, they plug in your product and like maybe one pops in, they're like, they're missing something here.
So there's like a bit of rehab that people have got to go. You got to you got to slowly eke them off the drug of like the sort of like dopamine hit when they get it. You get a notification. So like as in we didn't have this view, so we call it the experience view in the product, where you could see everything at the start. And so like right back in the early days, they'd be like, Dave, it's like not working. I'm like, no, it is working. And so then we opened this up, and you could like expose this whole back end, so really open and transparent, so they could trust it. But it is a noticeable switch, from going and having like hundreds, if not thousands, to deal with, to having like one case per day. And so there is this really like sort of like I say, what can only be described as a rehabilitation process. So, hey, no, you've got your time back. What do you then do with your time? How can you proactively push your security program forward, and of course we always insist on testing when people try our software for the first time, so then they know actually anything happens, it's going to pick it up, but those are the two key things, so the universal sensor sorts your data out, the AI triangulation, basically what we say is it integrates with, it restores trust in your existing architecture, and then obviously allows you to maximize the ROI, because then your team aren't running around dealing with this very high level of false positives. And, I know we're going to talk about talent at the minute and how we can encourage people to get into the industry, but, there's nothing that's going to put people off joining in like junior SOC roles in the industry is if we are not leveraging technology to its best ability to like make sure that they have got time to learn and develop, right? Because it's the beginning of their careers, right? If they are, being thrashed from the minute they walk in and start their shift to the minute they finish, that's unsustainable,
Yeah. We've seen it. We did on the podcast. We did a bit on getting people into industry, but one of the biggest problems is that we've got one of the highest industries for burnout.
Yeah.
So it's not only trying to get people to join a SOC team, but then probably in 2-3 years they're out the door anyway because they're burnt out. So it's like a horrible vicious circle. So
and it's happening at both ends now as well. I was actually asked to host the it's called the National Technology Security Coalition, which is like a US based group of CISOs, although they do allow CISOs from across different nations to join. And their job is to lobby Capitol Hill, on the big issues in the cybersecurity community, and chatting through with some of the key people there. They're saying the biggest thing they're lobbying at the minute is like workforce issues because of the talent shortage, and it's definitely a challenge with getting people in. But of course, you've got all this regulatory pressure coming down on people, right? And you've got albeit big people, maybe not behaving as they should have done in high pressure situations. And so what you then are seeing is, CISOs are in this like awkward position because they are very much on the hook for the regulatory and compliance consequences, but yet they may not have, whilst they've got a C-suite title, they may not have that position in the company whereby they're protected, for example, by the insurance protections of other directors in the company, and so if people begin getting prosecuted in the industry, you're going to then begin to get, it's already a very highly stressful job, right? Especially for the leaders. So you're going to get this like loss of a lot of experience potentially and a lot of capability
because he wants that on their head.
Yeah.
Interestingly though, with your military background, do you think there's a lot of stuff that we could take from military in the sense that you guys would have done practice hostage, you would have done, you don't just go to war like not practiced, like there's a lot of, and you do a lot about the mental stuff and the rehabilitation and what happens. Do you think that's because it's not a tangible thing that we don't put the same support mechanisms into the IT teams of like what happens when a ransomware happens and the impact on that? Because like you said, people get penalised for the decisions they've made, but it's a flight or flight response, isn't it? Most people don't know how they're going to respond
100%.
until they are in it.
Yeah.
So to then get pulled apart for that is quite, I don't know. Do you think there's things in the industry that we can learn on the human factor of preparation for it?
Yeah, undoubtedly, and the one thing the military is great at, because of the complexity of the operations, is sometimes called upon to conduct, is we will do very thorough planning, very thorough rehearsals. We will walk through step by step. We're going to clear this, we're going to do this. Helicopter's going to land over there, right? And we'll all pretend we get on the helicopter, right? We're going to walk over here. We're going to do this, And, that time spent rehearsing and mentally visualizing, okay, when this happens, we're going to do this. Okay, we now get contacted from the left. We're getting fired upon from the left. What are we going to do? We're immediately going to do this. And, that rehearsal of what happens under fire allows people to perform well under fire, And I think that's the point. Like, do not wait until, you get a notice pop up on your desktop or your laptop saying, you need to pay this much Bitcoin. It's, you want to be rehearsing and thinking about that. You want to build that muscle memory as an executive team beforehand.
Yeah.
Do your backups work? How do you communicate when,
do you
Microsoft
tell
Teams
customers, do you respond to press? Do you not respond to press? Do you, I think that's a big thing about it as well. You want these people to take these roles, but I don't know. From what I've learned from a lot of people that I've spoken to, or even people that have gone through an attack and survived it, and my earliest was WannaCry. I just started after all of that, and we were started in the NHS, and assumptions made maybe by me that they knew what to do, but it was a lot of post-it notes and paper running around, and I was like, oh. Yeah. And they were like, well, we weren't ready for it. We didn't. No one was prepared for it. No one had gone through it. No one had gone through it with the nurses, or not what to do, or not to log on to this. It was just. Yeah, and it's survival mode.
Yeah, I remember doing an incident response workshop with the CISO of Maersk, who was there at the time, and and he gave us like wonderful story about how it all unfolded, and of course, you're then going onto WhatsApp to manage your business. You're going back to pen and paper, you know what I mean, to manage your business, and are you really prepared for that? What contingencies have you got in place? What systems have you got in place otherwise, to really help you out? And so time spent in preparation is not going to be wasted. Getting your executive team to rehearse and mentally walk through a scenario. Okay, now this has happened. What are we going to do here? Our biggest customer has rang us up, going, what's going on? I hear, because of course, what these actors will do and what they're becoming very expert at now is beginning to apply the pressure in a really precise way to maximize the return on any hack. And what I mean is that is finding your most sensitive data. It means like double extortion of, hey, yeah, we got your data, but hey, we know you really care about your customers' data that we've grabbed, and now if you don't pay up, we're going to go and we're going to begin.
You touched on some of like the compliance regulations, legislations, those sort of pressures that are coming on. With a product like SenseOn, how does that support some of that legislation that's either coming, or there's always new ones. I feel like we talk about NIS2, MITRE, then there's DORA coming. So how does products and vendors support CISOs and tech teams to comply to those things?
So it's wide and it's varied. We've got global customers, right? So it's it really depends in terms of what region that you're in, but the ability and flexibility to have your data wherever you want it is something that's like very important. That privilege of choice in that regard is a mandatory requirement. You can't just say, hey, yeah, this is all going to go back to our cloud and you got to like it. Absolutely not. You've got to give that customer, especially in regulated industries, that privilege of the choice of where the data is stored and processed, and then of course, whilst there is a proliferation of these standards, they do tend to take inspiration at least from the last best practice, and so of course there's broad applicability of essentially what is a continuous logging and monitoring platform for any of these standards is pretty much a mandatory requirement in all of them. And of course, if you need it then as a service and you need 24/7 sort of eyes on, our partnership obviously is something that can facilitate that, right?
Yeah. And if anyone's listening to this and they're tackling visibility, or they're completely relating to the notification fatigue, or they're like, oh my God, I have no idea where to start, or I've got too much data, what would you say are some just best practice things that you would recommend someone does? Like, it's a big project, isn't it? It's a big piece. So what would you say is like a start here, work your way up? What would you say as an expert to do?
Yeah, so there's really 3 core components that you've got to consider. And the first one is the breadth and the depth of the data that you're going to capture, you know? And that's important because we have had many companies come to us and go, Dave, hey, I'm 30% into my SIEM project, and I've had the CFO on the phone saying, whoa, what's going on with these bills, you know? And so you've got to have predictability in your future cost model, and that future cost model has got to be sustainable, because otherwise you would have gone to all this time and effort of, like, you know, orienting the team around delivering on this objective only to be stopped, you know, and it is 30 to 50% of the way through because of the unpredictable nature of the cost. We solve that. We give you predictability in the cost, you know. The second thing then is, great, we got the data, but actually what does that mean in terms of risk, right? What's the breadth and depth of coverage of using common models like MITRE ATT&CK, or maybe, you know, the SIS top 18, I think it is now, as opposed to top 20, or any, whatever, you know, NIST, whatever it is that you want to use. But, like, you know, fundamentally, you've got to satisfy yourself and be able to report to the board, hey, we are now able to protect ourselves against these types of techniques or threats, or, you know, we've moved the capability on in terms of detection demonstrably, and you should be able to quantify that. And you know, again, that's something, being very data driven, that we can help you with. And then it's third, how do we operationalize this? Because it's great gathering loads of data and then having a very good broad and deep coverage of analytics and being able to detect things, but that will all be futile if there's now 10 million alerts in the SOC inbox and they don't know which one is real, because that's almost just as bad as having no visibility whatsoever, because they're going to miss that needle in the haystack.
Weirdly, exactly what I was thinking in my head. I'm just lots of rice in my head and trying to find the right one. Okay, so those are your best practices. What do you think is the future of this sector? Like, what do you see trends? What do you think that SenseOn's going to have to tackle? Because like you said, this is not a topic that you must know, like, the technology you've created is going to have to evolve with the attack. So what do you see is coming your way as a wave?
So we've always had this counterintuitive approach, right? You know, where we talked about these sort of compelling strategic trends that are not going to change. You know, it's going to be more complex. The threat is always going to evolve and advance, and the data is going to be a really big problem. And we've talked about the talent shortage as well.
Yeah.
Now, the vision of SenseOn is to make the internet a safe place so everyone can prosper. The emphasis is on everyone there, right? Because if you think about it today, Kelly, you know, you've got to go and buy firewalls, web proxies. You've got to go and, like, you know, hire skilled people that knows how to set all this infrastructure up. Then you've got to go and get endpoint tools and network tools and blah, 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 collect all the logs, what we just talked about. And so, you know, so then our mission then is how do you make this simpler, smarter, and secure? Because never really in the history of time has the answer to an exponential, because this is exploding the challenge in all directions, you know. Has it been a more complex solution? Actually, what you need to do is, what the industry needs, it needs a paradigm shift. It needs like a game sort of like a changing sort of shift. We can't keep doing the same thing that we've been doing, having all of these little tiny bits of the jigsaw puzzle. And so that's what we're attempting to do. So we're trying to go, hey, can you take a first principles approach to actually make the solution simpler, not worse? And that's really like core to everything that we do, right? You know, it's like, hey, how can we make this easier to deploy? How can we make this like simpler to manage, you know? And so, and when we talk about building future-proof solutions, a lot of the design thing that we do around it is, you know, well, yeah, this would be great and sexy and cool, but is it simple? Does it make the head of IT in a 250-person firm's job easier?
Yeah.
And doesn't make that CISO on the other end of the spectrum, who's got this like very complex beast to solve with like the 25 million alerts coming out, does it solve their problem, you know? And every time we go through that exercise, we go back to the drawing board and go, no, we got to make it simpler. You know what I mean? And so it is somewhat counterintuitive. And of course, we're always evolving. But actually, often what we're doing is like, okay, we built it this way this time. Could we then re-engineer to make this simpler, easier?
Because you're making it simpler and easier, and we're all used to it being complicated and needing loads of stuff, and we should have loads of notifications, and we should be really stressed. Do you like what you're trying to do in your mission's amazing, but do you think sometimes some people sit there? Have you found some people are like, oh, this is too easy? Like, that can't be right. What else have I got to plug into this?
All the time.
Right.
All the
you
time.
might have the opposite. Like, I know what you're trying to do, but just because I know what everyone's like around, I know what they're like around here. Are they not going to like, that's love, Dave, but I know I'm going to have to plug this in. That sounds too easy.
Well, you know, we're here to integrate with everything that you've got. That's the key thing, right? You know, because we want to make that simpler as well, right? As in, we want to be able to say, hey, if you've got like a noisy tool over here, but like, hey, you know, it fulfills a use case for you. Because the things about enterprises is they've often got bespoke use cases, and actually a lot of the times this is a Python script they wrote, like, you know, that then outputs alerts, you know, and so whereas like the first like 4 years of building like the product was focusing on let's get it right in our product, like as in the AI triangulation to like really build these attack paths and reduce this noise and surface just the most important threats, that is now applicable across your existing stack, you know. So the AI triangulation is not something that is caged to the confines of the SenseOn product. It's something that you can plug in the rest of your stack, and it can restore trust in all of the other products that you've bought as well, you know. And so like I think that's like super important, you know. You've got to meet customers where their problems is and where they want to be met, right, you know. And so like that's something that we're very, very like privileged to be able to do. And then going back to your point about skepticism, and the only way around that is testing, you know. So we've done a lot of independent testing where, you know, AAA rating, and you know, so like one component of the universal sensor is equatable to like traditional enterprise EDR, you know. So again, we just had a recent AAA rating in the enterprise EDR along with the leading EDRs. Likewise, you know, on the EPP component of the universal sensor, again, A+. So you know, by the very nature of our industry, you know, you've got to provide the customer with these proof points, especially when you're trying to do something new and different and innovative. You know, I think it's incredibly important because I say it's almost table stakes, right? You know,
Does SenseOn play particularly nice in any particular industry, or are you saying this is for anyone? And where are you seeing your successes predominantly? Or is there any industry, any person?
We have got like a very wide, diverse range of industries. There is a concentration, as you probably would expect, in critical national infrastructure. So there's like really important places to protect. And actually, we are a national security strategic investment fund company. So the UK government invested in SenseOn shortly after the SolarWinds hack, you know, because of this ability to remove those blind spots by combining this identity, endpoint, and network information. So critical national infrastructure, and then of course the highly regulated industry. So our largest proportion of customers are in financial services. But then, you know, we've got some great brands in retail, large global manufacturing brands. So like people who are widely distributed and are large have a higher propensity to buy SenseOn because the challenge of those geographically distributed federated decision-making models where, you know, you have an infrastructure team in South America and Asia and North America, and that's a challenge to, you know, if it's hard to get the data from like, you know, like 3 locations around the UK, it's even more. So those are all like, all of those signals are, you know, relate to people who have got a very, who've got challenges that SenseOn can really solve.
So Dave, just to close, there's some people like me that aren't very technical, and you used an example of AI triangulation. It would be something that people would say, well, marketing's made that up. What does that actually mean? In real terms, what does AI triangle? I mean, right now I've got AI in the middle and a triangle around it, but in my head. But could you explain what that actually means in your world? What is that doing?
Yeah, so like a simple analogy would be, you know, the global positioning system, right? You get a lock on one satellite, then it's not going to be that accurate. But you then begin to triangulate that with multiple satellites, then it becomes more and more accurate. And that's essentially what it's doing underneath the hood. And I sometimes like tell a story when it comes to this. And I reflect on a story that actually happened in September 1983. And there was an incident in the Russian nuclear operational command where 2 a.m. in the morning, Kelly, all of a sudden alarms begin going off, screens begin flashing red. And at that time, the protocol, because it was at the height of the Cold War, was you must immediately notify your superiors so a counterstrike can be launched back towards the US. Because what this was signaling was, oh my God, the US have launched nuclear missiles at Russia, you know?
Oh my God.
And the colonel in charge of it recounts this story where he's like frozen in his chair. He's like, you trained for this, but this looks legit, you know? And he describes how it was a bit of an ease as he got off from his chair. He sort of walked over and picked up the phone like he'd done almost like without thinking and training. It's ringing. It gets answered at the other end. And he's like, the alarms have just gone off, but it's like a false alarm. I don't want you to worry about it. And he puts down the phone and he's like, oh my God, what has just happened, you know?
Oh, well, he said that just like...
Yeah, he was like, a false alarm.
He didn't know that for sure?
He did not know for sure.
Oh!
And the consequence of that,
God.
the consequence of that would be an immediate counterstrike would have been launched back towards the US.
Of course.
Now, what subsequently came out was it was actually the reflection of some high altitude clouds over North Dakota that had caused this false alarm. Now, the point being, ever since that day, when there is a potential detection from that system, and I think the whole world will take some reassurance from this, it must be automatically triangulated from other satellites, you know? So that's what it's doing
just
for you.
one point of view.
That is what AI
I wonder what made
triangulation
him
do.
think this is a false alarm.
He said it was just his, like...
Gut.
And it was his gut, but the knowledge of the consequences of him doing the alternative, which was like they're attacking us, that like made him hedge his bets, you know. And so that's
how
why
lucky we were. It was him.
Yeah, and
that day.
Right, a guy named Colonel Petrov, fascinating story. You should definitely read
Yeah.
it. But that's the concept, right? You know, as in like you were being responsive to all of these potential threats in your environment. One, not everyone is getting hacked 10,000 times a day, every day. So that's the first thing, right?
Just an FYI.
Just as an FYI.
We're not all that interesting.
Exactly. But it's a horrible place to be in, you know? And so really what it is, AI triangulation is doing is it's bringing surety. It's bringing that inbox zero. It's bringing that time to breathe and reflect and to like be told only when you need to act about a security threat in your environment as opposed to being reactive all the time. So hopefully that provides you with...
Oh my goodness, can you imagine you just trigger happy? It was like, yeah, go! Oh,
yeah, no, it's a fascinating story, right? You know?
It's a lot of power for one person.
Yeah.
And but yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So Dave, thank you so much for your time. We have a closing tradition on the podcast where we ask our guests why we would like someone that's listening or thinking about joining the cybersecurity industry. As we all know, we have an issue of talent joining it. So why would you encourage someone to join? So
at the beginning, I talked about when you leave the military, the big gaping hole that's hard to describe is your loss of a sense of mission, you know. Yeah. And what I can say is really, you know, since founding SenseOn, I've got that back. The cybersecurity industry, you are doing good. You are helping people. It's adversarial, you know, and so like you're constantly at the heart of emerging technology. You're constantly at the heart of sometimes geopolitics, you know, in terms of that can turn the tide on like a swath of global attacks, and so. It's a great industry to be in, you know, if you're passionate about helping, if you're passionate about technology, and so yeah, obviously I would encourage anyone to join the industry.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave, for coming. I hope we'll have you on the podcast again soon.
Love to. Thanks.